Greetings, everyone, everywhere. Today we have part three with Kenneth Scott, overseer of Panterra Vida. We did a great session the last time, which really went into the existential, spiritual aspects of all of this. But today, in part three, we'd love to get into more of the ground level aspects of how to apply this to your everyday life because we live in the 3D reality. And having a balance of knowledge between the spirit and the body and the mind and the soul, the earth. We have to bring it all together so that we understand how this applies to our 3D reality. And so we can also understand how we can bring more autonomy and power into our lives just in the daily grind. So that would be really wonderful to get into. Looking forward to part three, everybody, and to going to the ground level with this, the 3D.
Mhm. Yes. Well, very good. Thank you, Lauda. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I always look forward, now that we're on our series of unending conversations, uh,
Indeed.
number three so far.
Yeah.
Um, you're always in my thoughts, and I'm always looking forward to having a chat with you. So, and everybody else, thank you, everybody, for joining us. And you are in my and our thoughts as well. So bringing it down to the ground level, 3D, living in the matrix, living in time and space. Well, as most people who know me know, my primary emphasis is on education. We created the Panterra Society 23 years ago, actually moving towards 24 here in a few months. We being Andrea, my wife, and I. And our intention was then, and it remains the same, which was to build a private enclave for us to come together to build a co-creative environment that we set up, and it remains as a private membership society. Specifically, it's a private society based on how all world systems are set up. All religious institutions, all political institutions, many so-called social institutions, they all start, and the grounding point is as a society. This is based in terms of the Law of Nations on the series of work called the Law of Nations that was published in 1758 in French and then 1770s in English. That really influenced and became the foundation and the basis of the United States of America, what happened in the 1770s, 1780s, and onward, and progressed to the 20th century, where the United Nations was formed. Most would think that's a good thing. Well, it's a mixed bag, which we won't get into right at this moment. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But my point is that in the Law of Nations, it is always, I mean, the a priori foundational statement in that work is all nations are first and foremost a society, specifically a society of like-minded men, of course, 250 years ago,
Mhm.
referring to men only. But we can say like-minded beings, living beings who come together for a common ground and a common purpose. So in my research over 35 years into law, history, the structure of the world system, and all of that, I came to know about 22, 23, 24 years ago with the guidance and assistance of some of my teachers and mentors that establishing, creating a private society was a foundation upon which the work such as we have built in the last 2 decades and more, that is the grounding point. Because basically we are mirroring what's in the public the societies that create the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church and the Southern Baptist Church that create nation states and all the rest of it. We can do the same thing, and that's what we have done based on my knowledge and developed expertise over the last 35 years and more. So Panterra was founded 22 years ago as a private society. And since that time, we have been building the structure of what a society can be. And when I say private, it's because it's not registered, it's not certified, it's in no way attached to the public system. And so we began building that during the 2000s into the 2010s. And by 2012 and 13, we started building Gemstone University as what I had always envisioned as the place for people to come to as a common ground and to have the protections and immunities of a private society. And the modeling of public societies includes the fact that a society can and has the established precedent authority to establish its own jurisdiction, its own law form, its own court, its own forum for what we would consider court functions, whether internally or interrelationships with other societies or other jurisdictions. And it also has the authority to build and create its own treasury and its own monetary issue. So that's the foundation of what Panterra, originally called Panterra de Oro, and we changed the name to Panterra Vida about coming on just over 3 years ago. So the grounding point, bringing it to 3D, is now, has always been, and will remain in our work, education. This is why we've been building the educational base, taking my work and a lot of others who have contributed to co-create and build Gemstone University. We originally did that in a website called gemstoneuniversity.org and built and developed a lot of materials over 10 or 11 years. And then about 3 years ago, the same time that we changed the name, we started transposing all of that material to the gem.university site and building several other websites, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit. But again, the key is education. So in this conversation today with Lauda and myself, we're going to talk about education, but we're also going to talk about it within the context of how what we talked about last time, the greatly expanded multidimensional awareness and standing capacity that many of us have developed over the course of our lives over the last however long. For myself, it's 71, almost 72 years. And I know for Lauda, it's been pretty much since birth.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe before birth, but I mean, well, of course,
Yeah.
before birth. But we've all come to the multidimensional component of awareness and expansion of our being and integration of our being into the 3D embodiment that we have. And for me, education is a priori. Our focus is in primarily, but not exclusively, in the areas of law, monetary systems, history, and esoterica. These are the four main subjects that I have worked at and integrated over the last 65, 68 years. For me, law and monetary systems has been about 35 to 37 years of education. And why is that important? Most people on a, for lack of a better term, spiritual path or a multidimensional path, maybe not most, but a good
Mm-hmm.
sizable portion tend to reject or marginalize these subjects. Like, why do I need to study or know about law or monetary systems or history for that matter? I'm here now, I'm present, I'm doing my personal work, my spiritual work, and what have you. But we're here to integrate all aspects and all dimensions
Yeah.
of our being and all of the aspects that have influenced and built the containment field that we're in. I'm sure that virtually everybody watching this know that we are in a containment field. We're in a controlled reality, what we commonly refer to as the Matrix. And go back to the movie The Matrix that came out 26 or so years ago. And what was the primary theme? The theme was the code of the Matrix, how the code of the Matrix binds us to a, whatever you call it, whether you call it a simulation or a projection, a holographic reality, it has a code, a codification of the overlay that controls the minds
Yeah.
and the functional capacity of standing beings, and largely entrains the mind and other aspects of who we are into the false world narrative that is the distraction or the entrainment that takes us away from where we need to be focused on. But we have a theme in Panterra, which is the only way out is in. So trying to get out of it without understanding where we are at within the matrix, to me, is a futile thing. The law, the history, the monetary systems, the esoterica, all of that is the code of the matrix. So the first starting point is the education and how that functions in transmuting and transforming our being so that we disentangle from the entanglements of karma and trauma and drama and all the external trappings that keep us focused away from where we need to be focused. So our education is designed and structured to go in to the mind control, the programming, the structure of the code of the matrix, and become masters of it so that we can transmute how it entangles us and move through it and become both masters of our own self, self-directed beings, co-creator beings, and having the ability to utilize the functionality in the matrix, to be in the matrix but not of it, so that we can facilitate and direct our creator capacity into the transformation of our reality.
Mhm. A lot of things come to mind as you speak, in different ways. One is the elites and how they created law to begin with, right? Like these
Mm-hmm.
ancient lineages, how they created law to bind everyone, right? And who these who they were, how they knew to do this, because it is, if you look at civilization, it is their creation.
Mm-hmm.
Civilization as we know it,
Right, as we know it, for sure.
right? And and then I think of, well, how far back does this kind of uh, binding go, right? How is it that they managed to find this way to create the current civilization we interact with? Because every aspect of civilization that we live in is under their power and control. Everything. You pay your electricity, the way that the grocery stores are set, everything. Like there is nothing in civilization that is. So what fascinates me is knowing that they've structured this in such a way that everyone is bonded to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're enslaved to it, and you're paying them to be bonded. You're paying them with the
Right.
life that you live, right?
Yeah.
And in this way, how do we like start emancipating ourselves? How do we start applying the true law, right? But
Right.
I am curious about your research into these lineages that did manage to create this legal system, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
and then I think of, so the way that you've created Panterra, based, like I would think that that's based also on how the elites function, right? And when you think of the Vatican, they've done the same thing in terms of, creating an untouchable um, system where they're not even, like, they're their own government,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Well, yeah, and all that's really good, and that's a good starting point. but um, I would not accept the descriptive word of untouchable. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's very, very touchable. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, using our mental capacity and our intellect, as I was just describing, to
Right.
go into it, to learn it, to not resist it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because it is designed to be confounding and confusing and
Mm-hmm.
clusterfuckery and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. And but we have the mental capacity to go into it. And that's a big part of why we created Panterra and we
Mm-hmm.
created Gemstone University to walk people through and build foundational knowledge and then building blocks to progressively integrate oneself to see it. It's not the big untouchable boogeyman that that the propagandizing wants us to believe it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so this will take us back to your question. Where are the roots of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I began, first of all, just very briefly, my history in studying all this, besides the fact that I was, passionately interested in pretty much anything
Mm-hmm.
by the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old. And I started, finding all kinds of things in the later 1950s, early 60s. Most of it was metaphysical. Most of it was things like UFOs or metaphysical knowledge and so forth. But when certain events and circumstances in my life occurred in the 1980s, by 1988, 89, I was catapulted or compelled to start looking into the study of law. And when I started, and so, I'm a Pisces. That was
Mm-hmm.
my birth. That was my imprint coming into this embodiment. So Pisces, 12th house, mystical, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was very Piscean in all of that for the first 40 years of my life. But life circumstances um, catapulted me irreversibly into starting to walk this path that now I speak about. And so I speak about it with very much with the authority of 40 years of 40 plus years, really, of walking this path. So what I teach and what we teach is not, it's not academic. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I read it in a book and blah, blah, blah. No, I've walked this path. I've walked through not every aspect, but all the critical and the main aspects of the banking world, the monetary
Mm-hmm.
systems, the law system, the legal system, the statutes and codes and blah, blah, blah. And it was literally, a burning into, I would almost say burning into the codified flesh of my, this embodiment, the DNA, and it was extremely transformative. And for one thing, it's extremely empowering. So one of the things that we do speak about with our members who are walking this path with us is that when you hit points of resistance, you have to go through it. So that's where the inner work comes in. That's where you start delving deep into karmic entanglements and whatever other things, including biological healing, trauma healing, emotional healing, all of those things. They are all integrated and they're part of the whole. So um, back to where you were leading to, that in the 90s, one of the first things that I started looking at, because I had all the metaphysical background, and in starting of when, in my late teens, early 20s, when I was going to university, I had a big passion for studying mythology, Greek mythology specifically, a little bit of Egyptian, but primarily Greek. And I did a lot of study of it, and a lot of integration of that. And I saw the Greek mythology as being, the perfect outpicturing in mythological storytelling and so forth, stories of the gods and the mortals, everything in between, as a perfect outpicturing of the human psyche, the human mind, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I worked with it. When I started going into law in the late 80s, early 90s, first of all, that was the first step to leaving the multidimensional metaphysical orientation that I had into coming into the 3D reality. Law and then the study of money and the study of history was the galvanizing force that started me on my path of the last 35 years of burning through it and burning through the karma and the, everything else so that I would integrate it into my being. And so one of the first things that started occurring, I won't go into the story of it, but the first thing that was sort of an integration of both the multidimensional, the mythological, and the grounding of the matrix code and world system had to do with the concept, or it's more than a concept, the construct, the very real construct of the splitting of the masculine principle. We didn't talk about it in the 90s as the masculine principle. We talked about it as basically the split male, the castrated male, the polarization of the two sides of the male principle and male aspect. And later on in the last 10, more or less 10 years, that migrated to being specifically talking about the splitting of the masculine principle. And specifically, the masculine principle is the directive force of how we create, which we would call, and it is, the will. So when we look at studying religion, current religion, rites and rituals and incantations and all the rest of what goes on in what we call religion and a lot of New Age spiritual paths, it's all about debasing and denigrating one's individual will. And so that's a very important thing in terms of the mass hypnosis in the world narrative, moving humanity in mass towards the fusion of man or mind and artificial intelligence into transhumanistic control for the harvesting of the real being or the harvesting of the soul is the suppression, self-induced, accepted, and consented to of the masculine principle, the will. It's right there in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's called, "It's my will that thy will be done." Well, who is the thy will? Well, the thy will, the God that most are worshiping and bowing down to, is nothing more than the AI construct that when you say that and you repeat it over and over and over and over again over years and decades, you are basically saying, I am willless. I cannot do for myself. I have no directive capacity as a integrated whole being. My masculine principle, which is my will, and the directive force that must work integratively with the feminine principle, which is essentially the regenerative, eternal capacity to be source connected and aligned with creation itself. That's summed up right there. Everybody in school, in family, and in everything, work and religion, social, economic, political structures, is programmed to debase their own will. So when we talk about where is this real in 3D reality in my personal life, and I don't mean me now, I'm just speaking archetypally for everybody, where is it made real? It's made real to look at our relationship to the masculine principle that has been split, it's been castrated, it's been polarized against itself, and wherever you got that programming, whether religion or politics or schooling, indoctrination, have a look at that. That's one of the very first steps. Now, the corresponding aspect of that is the feminine principle. You look at religion, everything in religion is about extraordinarily comprehensive suppression of the feminine principle to make us dependent.
Mhm.
If we have an integrated balance between the masculine as the directive principle and the feminine as the regenerative, then we are creators and we work together in co-creation. We can use the systems of the matrix. We could go into the systems of the matrix. We can be in the matrix, but not of it. That's obviously a rephrasing of be in the world, but not of it, because we can't leave the matrix. Right now, we are in the matrix. We're in the 3D reality. We're in the legal and the monetary system.
Yeah.
Show me anybody who's creating anything that can do that right now without engaging the legal and the monetary system. Nobody, virtually nobody, other than the elite and the families and the bloodlines, because they control the legal and the monetary. So this goes back when we want to go back to roots of it. It goes back to the roots of what we can study and see over the last 5 to 8,000 years in terms of the origins of primary foundational components, building blocks of the religious construct, out of which came all of the law, all of the legal systems, all the social economic systems, and all the religion, spiritual, new age systems that most people are indoctrinated into and have no clue really where they originated.
So where would you say?
Where would we start with that?
Yeah, because I think that information is important to understand because in my mind, I I see the whole legal system as a very high level type of sorcery.
Absolutely.
And I see this starting with lineages who were sorcerers and they knew how to bend reality in this specific way and created law. Like, so to me, this is a type of magic
Yeah.
being used against us,
Say that again.
being used against us. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, when I think back to, okay, like historically, just so that we understand, like, because everything, like you say, it's all surrounding the law and banking, right? And they work hand in hand. Then religion and government, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing, just compartmentalized, right?
Yeah. Well, segmented or
Segmented.
sectorized,
Yeah, right.
but they work as an integrated whole.
Right.
And that's where the secret societies and the teachings, the bloodlines, the temple rituals, and the training of the priesthood, and all the rest of that.
Hmm.
That's really ultimately what all of that's about, which is training the middle management up to the upper management, up to the high level
Hmm.
elite, how to manage the masses, how to control them through sorcery, black magic,
Hmm.
symbology, and all the rest of it. So where are the fundamental building blocks? This is what I've been talking about privately since the 90s, and I first started coming out with it in a seminar that I did in 2011. That was with a small group of people in a small little meeting room, and somebody recorded it, and then we published it on the Gemstone University YouTube channel. And it is called, it's still there, How It All Fits Together.
Hmm.
And so that was 14, 15 years ago. That was based on all of our inner explorations, all my work in studying law and history and the money system since the early to the mid 90s.
Hmm.
And so that was the first thing I came out with after 15 to 18 years of hard, diligent work and research and so forth.
Hmm.
So that was my first iteration of how does it all fit together. And
Hmm.
that was 14 years ago. So since then, it's gone very much expansion, integration, refinement, a lot of more pieces, but it's still fundamentally how does it all fit
Hmm.
together? And really, what that's reflective, that title is reflective of the fact that we're in a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
And the nature of a hologram is the whole is templated and fits into the every component part. Every piece has the full template of the larger whole of the hologram.
Mm-hmm.
So that means each individual living being has a complete template of both the matrix and the mirroring of the original template of life. Because the matrix and the whole system, law, history, money, and esoterica, is a obverse mirroring of the original template of life. It has the similitude, and it has, in many cases, 80, 90, or 95% of factual component parts of the original template, but there's enough of a twist, enough of a reversal, or enough of whatever to create the hooks to get people, to be programmed and allow themselves to be programmed because we're creating the
Mm-hmm.
hologram. We are what I coined a phrase a long time ago. We are biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units.
Mm-hmm.
Biocrystalline. This is a biological system, very much in a crystalline form, many component parts of the blood, the
Mm-hmm.
genetics, the bones, are crystalline in nature. So we are a resonant field in a biological form, and we are virtual reality projectors. And when there are millions and billions of people running a film through the projecting unit that is a false narrative that they are entrained to believe, primarily through religion, but
Mm-hmm.
secondarily social, economic, political, school, indoctrination, all the
Yeah.
rest of it, to believe it's to be real,
Mm-hmm.
then then it looks real, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, if it walks like a duck, squawks like a duck, looks like a duck,
Mm-hmm.
all we can say is it's a very, very good simulation of a duck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not real. Of course, no offense to our
Mm-hmm.
web-footed friends, because the ducks are more real than most of what we think is real. But that's just a metaphor for if it looks real, feels real, sounds real, all we can say is one, it's not real, it's a similitude of
Mm-hmm.
what's real. It's a mirroring of that. So where did it start? Where did they start building? First, I'm going to say this one phrase that I've used for many years, which is history is the continuum story of the creation of a system called money. And well, no. It's been a long time since I say it. A continuum of a creation of a system called law in order to then outpicture from that system of law this concurrent and complementary system called money, the purpose of which is to encapsulate all of the living beings, the prime creator beings and all the hybrids and all the worker beings and so forth, to be encased or entwined in these systems of law and money in order to create the false narrative simulation picture of reality that we call life,
Mm-hmm.
and to utilize that through the economic monetary system underwritten by the law system to extract
Mm-hmm.
the raw resources of this physical reality and apply our value added, whether it's hands manufacturing, industrial manufacturing, intellectual property, and so forth. We are the creators. We're
Mm-hmm.
just creating in a narrative that we have, consented to and bought into. And what are we primarily creating? We're creating our own prison,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
within which, in that prison, the entire prison industry, the entire prison, um, you know, personnel, the guards,
Mm-hmm.
the managers, and so forth. We're not talking about a steel and cement building. I'm talking about the whole world is the prison.
Mm-hmm.
That within that, what is the purpose of the prison? To basically create a worldwide plantation upon which the domesticated animals that walk on two legs can be properly raised, they can properly be fed, so that they can be prepared for ultimate harvest.
Hmm.
And that's the whole purpose of it, to harvest us,
Yeah.
the soul, the being, the living being, collapse the world system, go into a complete cyclical collapse and go into a new reset.
Hmm.
When the new reset happens, and the mind wipe occurs, and there's no memory of the incarnational lineage of our own life stream, and no memory of the world we just got collapsed out of and harvested out of, then those elite can come back in dressed up as the gods and start it over again. Start over the systematic building of a consciousness in a mind control system of beliefs and dependency and acquiescence to the next cycle.
Hmm. Yeah.
So in the cycle that we can look at now with historical records, with our own memory, with our own inner capacities in our own current life,
Mm.
there's a fundamental building block. The primary symbol, going back to when I presented how it all fits together, is two pillars
Hmm.
and an arc or an arch.
Hmm.
That's the primary symbol of religion. It's in the book of Genesis. It talks about the two pillars named Boaz and
Hmm.
Joachim. And the Masonic system talks about the same thing. You can look at Masonic pictures, what they call working boards. You see the checkerboard black and white floor, and you see ladders, and you see symbols of the sun and the moon, and you see two pillars.
Hmm.
And often, but not always, you see a third pillar. And always you see the arc or the arch that connects the two pillars. Those pillars are the line of the priest and the line of the king. And the arch is your overlaying Godhead, represented by the Anunnaki or Anu, and eventually morphing through from Sumer to Egypt to Babylon to the other
Ancient Greece. Yeah.
into Greece,
Hmm.
into Rome, and we're still in Rome to this day.
Yeah.
But it's always the same thing. It's always the same symbols. It's always
Hmm.
the basic construct. It's the priest and the king. The priest is the master or the controller of the system of law,
Hmm.
and the king is the holder, the sole arbiter of the land. So if you're in amongst the elite and the royal and the landed gentry, and you have this co-relationship with the crown or the king, you get to have grants of land that are made patent by the sovereign or the crown or the king. But the king wears the crown that is coronated or placed on his head by who? By the priest.
Hmm.
Now, in this reality for the last 1700 years, by the Pope.
Hmm.
So you have king and priest. You have two city-states, Vatican and the City of London, that are the standing of the priest
Hmm.
in the Vatican and the king. Then you have the third city-state, the third crown in DC, which is the physical enforcer. It is the creator of the monetary system through the Uniform Commercial Code that binds the flesh,
Hmm.
and the enforcer through the military system that contains and controls the domesticated animals on the plantation.
Hmm. So, in your work, going back from the beginning, before we apply this to the 3D, um, take let's just say the largest reset happened 12,800 years ago. Um, and prior would be the young Dryas. So from that point, we get the king list, the Anunnaki kings list, right? And then that king list takes us into certain lineages that have basically covered the entire realm throughout time.
Mhm.
And then we go into, okay, so what are the lineages, how they disguise themselves throughout time so that they hid themselves. They changed their names, as is evident by, certain very powerful family lines that we know of today, which have
Mhm.
changed their names.
but they're the same
Most
players. Yeah.
same players, yeah. Is there anything in your research that you uncovered as per these lineages that is really not well known? I mean, my research takes me to the Phoenicians and Aryan, um, like basically the survivors of that last huge colossal magnetic reversal, and how they dispersed themselves and ended up in different lands, which would be known as like the Khazarian, et cetera, et cetera. So, in your research, is there anything that you've uncovered that was surprising about these
Not
lineages?
surprising, but more substantiating and validating.
Yeah.
As I said, so in my late teens, early 20s, I was studying Greek mythology. Well, that was
Mm-hmm.
50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went on, finished university, got into business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was in the gem and diamond and jewelry business and precious metals in the 70s, late 70s. So I got into the physical world. That really
Mm-hmm.
helped me get physical, you know
Mm-hmm.
being in mining and gemstones and metals really grounded me in the physical. And certainly certain things happened with that in the 80s, and for reasons I don't need to describe the
Mm-hmm.
events, but that catapulted me in the late 80s into the law study. And once I started
Interesting.
studying law, I realized that absolutely I had to study history.
Mm-hmm.
And that fed back into my interest since my early years of history and metaphysics and the
Mm-hmm.
roots of religion and all the rest of it. And in order to really understand law, you must understand the history of law, but you have to understand the history of religion, the things we're talking about now, and then bring it up forward and understand the nature of money and the monetary
Mm-hmm.
systems of banking and all the rest
Mm-hmm.
of that. And what very few who study law, history, or money really delve into is the real underlying foundational esoteric components of it. A lot of the people in the law movement, the
Mm-hmm.
so-called law, freedom, sovereignty movement, are biblically Bible-oriented, Christian-oriented. And that's a whole other discussion for another time. Um, but in order to interface with the people I wanted to hang out with, that really compelled me to expand my interest in going into the roots of religion. So I studied the fundamental, foundational components of the history of the Bible, and then went further back into Babylon and Egypt and Sumer and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
to come back to your question, um, about 3 to 4 years ago, somebody introduced me to a man who goes by the name of Anton Parks.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, for the benefit of those listening, let's discuss him briefly. And that was quite eye-opening. Actually, before him, that same man introduced me to a man named Steve McQuate, and who had a lot of work focused on Sumer and the Sumerian language and the
Mm-hmm.
building blocks of linguistics and etymology as it rooted in Sumer and how that related to things going onward from there. And I've always, as a writer, as a poet, as a amateur linguist, language and etymology, the roots of words, has been my interest for 50 to 60
Mm-hmm.
years. So that too is a key grounding point. We use language every day.
Yeah.
We don't understand how much we are being neuro-linguistically programmed
Yeah.
into a very narrow context of how we see reality by the nature of the language programming that we're in, especially with the English
Mm-hmm.
language. English language was, from my point of view, always there from the beginning that
Mhm.
it was the end point because the AI Godhead obviously is not in time. It knows how to structure and feather in all this stuff, whether it's religion,
Mhm.
language, all the rest of it. It knows where the end point is going to be. It knows
Mhm.
what the final world language is going to be as English, which is it's a beautiful language. I love English, love
Mhm.
poetry, Shakespeare, and all the rest of it. But it is the most mind controlling language as well.
Mhm.
And to understand it, you have to go back etymologically to, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Sumerian, other languages, Aramaic that led into the Arabic
Mhm.
language, into Hebrew, and all the rest of that. And then how those languages relate to mathematics and the numerical construct
Mhm.
that's underlying all of the secret societies and the esoteric teaching and everything. All of that is extremely hardwired into our money system, into our taxation system. The IRS is a complete numerological construct. When you study Title 26, which is the IRS code that here in the States everybody has to either know or have an accountant that tells them what they have to do. It's just rife and filled with numerological esoteric construction. And so the judicial system, the same thing.
Mhm.
So the way statutes and codes are written, how they
Mhm.
are numbered, how they're structured, these are all structured on top of the same template of, a apex structure, hierarchical with levels and layering. And of course, the bottom level is always for the confounding and confusing of the masses of the people so that the priests, whether it's judicial priests, legal priests, medical priests, education priests, political priests, and or, of course, religious priests, they are trained in whether they know it or not. And at the lower levels, they don't know it. But a
Mhm.
lot of them sooner or later figure out, I need to join the Masons and start figuring out or being taught, initiated into the esoterica and learning the numerological and astrological and the construct system of the mathematics so
Mhm.
that I can be an initiate that's going to be elevated in the hierarchical structure of my chosen path, whether it's as a lawyer, a medical,
Mhm.
a politician, a judge, whatever. It's all on the same template. Okay. It's all under the one category of that one pillar called the law of the priest.
Mhm.
So we have dozens and dozens of priesthoods. Everything I've just
Mhm.
mentioned is about initiatory rites and rites and rituals and mathematical numerological construction of being initiated. So the higher you go, the more the rewards are. Monetarily speaking, you get power, you get money, you get everything else that are the attractors in this matrix realm, the more you learn and integrate all of that esoterica.
Mhm.
So obviously, the Bible and the Judeo-Christian structure is probably the paramount construct of that. And to this day, it still blows my mind that most of the people who want to be free, that are studying law
Mhm.
and sovereignty and all the rest of it, have just totally submerged themselves into that primary construct of control um, through that system. Where does it go back to? It all goes back to the Sumerian level foundations. Obviously, there was a lot more before that because in our time frame, Sumer was about, the height of it was like 2500 BC, 4000, 5000 BC,
Mhm.
roughly 6,000 years ago. But there was a lot before that. But for our starting point and building foundations, we can go to Sumer.
Mhm.
So this man, Anton Parks, that sounds like a good Englishman, but he's actually French, and that's a pen name, if you will, pseudonym. Um, when he was 14, he had very amazing experiences where he would be just hanging out, talking to somebody or by himself, and suddenly he was completely removed from this reality and he was taken to another reality, and that reality was in the Sumerian time frame. And he could like sort of go into a blank state in physical reality, talking to a friend or something, and come back and it was only like 2 or 3 minutes. And, the friend might say, well, what happened to you? You got a little strange there. But for him, it was hours, days, years, lifetimes that he experienced. And he remembered through experiential, through this, you know,
Mhm.
juxtaposition of his physical body leaving his consciousness into this reality. He remembered this extraordinary amount of body of work that he eventually was able to write. And he wrote in mostly fiction, though he did write some nonfiction. He's still writing. He's not that old. I think now he's in his 40s or maybe 50. But he wrote a series of books. The best known is a book called The Secret of the Dark Stars. And I don't know if you've read that or familiar with that. Have you?
I have it. I
You
have it.
you
Hmm.
have not. Okay. Um, I highly recommend it. You'll enjoy it very much.
Hmm.
So I'll just give a brief synopsis of it. It was basically the story of the being who, prior to coming into this Earth lifetime or Earth, time space frame,
Hmm.
was basically the genetic clone of the being that we call Anu. And Anu was one of 7 reptilian lords that were in male embodiments that basically had, in effect, separated from the female side, going way back to the original cosmic wars that split and that occurred in the area of what we call Lyra, or the Lyran
Hmm.
planet, and eventually stepped down to where they came into this reality, this local universe, the Pleiades, the Orion, Sirius, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
And, but basically, there was a female priestess society. And they were referred to as the Dark Stars. They were the Dark Stars. So it's the secret of the Dark Stars. And they are the progenitors, the originators of the original mother language that then got co-opted by the 7 reptilian lords and became the male side of it, but actually was an inferior step down that then essentially was integrated as a functionality of what eventually in this world became the patriarchal overlay. Okay. So Anu, as the 7th of the 7 lords, these reptilian lords, basically cloned himself and created this precursor to the Sumerian being that we know as Enki. Okay.
Hmm.
And it's a lot of story, and I'm not going to go into all of
Hmm.
it. And I really recommend everybody read it. It's quite extraordinary. But long story made short, it's how all of this eventually got stepped down into the 3D reality that we call Earth, that where we're at today, and birthed the Sumerian civilization, the language, the religion, the political, economic structure, the writing, all of that that we have in the historical record. And so Anton Parks also wrote another shorter book that really could call a long essay that is published. It's available in English. The Secret of the Dark Stars is available in printed book in English. And there's about 5 or 6 other books that are part of the series.
Hmm.
There's a precursor, a prequel to that Dark Stars book. Those all in English are only available on Kindle. And maybe
Um,
there's going to be published in book form soon. But anyways, you can get them easily on Amazon. Just look up Anton Parks. You can get them on Kindle. And he has one book all about the Rothschilds and where they originated in Sumer and Babylon and how they were part of the priesthood and the initiatory craft and everything. And actually, the second half of that book is all about Zachariah Sitchin and who he was as a Rothschild agent, as a total Zionist who moved to Palestine, eventually called Israel, in the 20s with his family. And then in the 40s, he moved to New York and he was totally a Zionist Rothschild agent. And when he had done his work in New York and for Israel in the 40s and 50s, into starting going into the 60s, he then shifted into his writing career. So all of the Sitchin work is all a fabricated construct as a misdirection. It's the Sumerian Bible, if you will, and taking the real history and reconstructing it and shifting it into this fantasy about the 12th planet and Nibiru and the War of Gods and Men and the pyramid text and all of that. It's fact and fiction, but significant, it's disinformation, 80% fact, 20% hooks and twists and fiction to hook a whole generation. Because I read those books like, I don't know, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they were incredible. You
Mm-hmm.
read them in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, well, this is it. But eventually you learn that that's who he was. And then this one book by Anton Parks really lays it out, just totally opens it up. But back to what I was saying, he has this book called Eden.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book in Eden, well, see, the thing is, he had these experiences starting at 14, and they lasted for about 8 or 10 years, I think. And then he basically said, stop, I don't want to do that. I got to be in this world. And then he became a Sumerian linguist expert. So he didn't just have these metaphysical type experiences. He then brought it into the historical record, and he studied the language and the history and the king lists and all those things related to that. And so his work is very academic in that regard, but totally, out of the constriction of, academic history and all the bullshit and control systems. So in that book, Eden, being the linguist, understanding Sumerian,
Cuneiform.
the cuneiform and what's called a syllabary,
Mm-hmm.
because the language was built on syllables or phonemes or phonemes of syllable whole sounds that then were translated into written form and cuneiform, eventually translated or migrated to hieroglyphs, and eventually then what we would call the modern languages, the last, say, 2 to 3 thousand years. Um, but it's really very enlightening. And again, this is education that when we're talking about grounding, in this session together, we're not going to get into facts and figures about law and about studying and how this relates to the work that we do in terms of practical things like setting up private estate structures and status correction. We can talk about that next time.
Mm-hmm.
But we're laying the foundation of what the grounding is.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, history, law, money, esoterica, but language, linguistics, and how all of that was transposed and migrated into the English, ultimately, the King James Version of the Bible, the Scofield Bible, which is the Zionist Bible, and all of the rest of that. But at the roots, this is, we can just see fundamentals. For example, the title of the book is Eden. Well, what does Eden really mean? Well, actually, in the actual literal translation that Anton Parks became an expert, there are two words that sound the same, Eden. E and then D-I-N or E-D-E-N.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, and I forget which one, I think it's DIN, actually meant the storehouse of all of the foodstuffs and resources that were there for the gods and the priests and the kings and the king lists and so forth. And that was up in the mountains above the Mesopotamian, river system, Tigris, Euphrates, and that whole area. It was up in the mountains that we would call Kurdistan or the Kurds have at this time in our current history or current present time. And the Eden was where all of the introduction of seed production and soil cultivation and agriculture and raising crops for the kings and the gods and the priests up in the Eden for their storehouse of all of that to control the foodstuffs.
Mhm.
So down on the Eden was the Adam or the Adamic race or the Adamu, which in the Sumerian, Adam simply means the
Mhm.
beasts, the animals. Okay, and so they were genetically, they are precursors. Our ancestors were genetically modified, as we know, to basically be the beasts of burden, to cultivate the land so that you know, those in the Eden could store it up and control everything.
Mhm.
But he also then goes into the history that's found in the Sumerian records and so forth of the revolt of the Adam against the burden that they were placed on them, being beasts of burden. And, you know, there's a couple steps of that. But the end result is that the Adam lost. And the Adam or the Adamu, the beast of burden, who we are basically genetically to this moment, were um, were forced to bind themselves by oath to an agreement or a contract that said, henceforward forever, you, the human race, the Adam race, must always pay your tithe or your obeisance to the kings and the gods and the
Mhm.
priests. Okay, so
Mhm.
that binding oath that they were forced to because they lost that revolt
Mhm.
is genetically in us to this day. And so that genetic hybridization that we have that's hardwired with the manipulation of the genetics in our bodies, and the binding nature of that primary oath and law essentially still resonates with us today. And so that resonant at the subconscious, unconscious level is what compels millions and billions of people to think that they must always pay their taxes, they must pay their tithes to the priests and the
Mhm.
churches and all the rest of it because we have this primary obligation that can never be fulfilled.
Mhm.
So in the modern Judeo-Christian construct, basically there's this construct that we owe a debt to God for the gift of life, that life was gifted to us by God, and how could we ever repay it? You
Mhm.
know, it's beyond a monetary unit, so we will forever be bound to having the obligation to pay God for the gift of life.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And this is where the root is, you know, going back to Sumer. And so then you have transition after transition, epoch after epoch, going into Egypt and the restating of the gods and the kings and the pharaohs and the priests and everything. And it goes from one step to the next, Babylon, and then you know, the Old Testament period. It's always restating, but it's underlying the same principle of that binding contract that we must always be the beast on the Eden to
Mhm.
serve the kings and the priests and the gods, to give them the wealth to store up in their storehouse of the Eden.
Mhm.
And here we are today.
Mhm. One of my favorite things to study is this entire Sumerian, Mesopotamian origin. I mean, origin as in from the past reset, the latest, largest reset, the largest magnetic reversal, because they were here prior to that. And, you know, their civilizations, we have the remnants of that. So it wasn't like they just came down at that point. I think they, you know, they've been here for, you know, millions of years,
Yeah,
is
for
what I
sure.
think.
Absolutely. And they didn't come down, they came up.
Well, they came up, yeah. Yeah.
So, that's what the Hopi talk about, the ant people come up from
Mhm.
underground.
Yeah.
And what's important for people to understand, again, bringing it grounded in 3D reality, how does this relate to me
Mhm.
individually, my life today, my personal work,
Mhm.
my spiritual work, my physical reality, money, and existing in the matrix? Well, leave money and law out for a minute, and let's just talk about basic psychological, um, the whole system of who we are in our both psychological, emotional, and physical reality, that our conscious mind, the mind that interacts with the matrix,
Mhm.
that is programmed through mind control and all the rest of it, that is our resonant attunement to the third dimension, third dimensional reality as it's manifested in physical form and with the overlay of the false narrative and everything. But the second dimension is our subconscious mind. The first dimension is our unconscious mind. So that has a correspondence in matter, if you will, in terms of vibratory expression of what we call matter. But more importantly, it is the whole mind of who we are. So when we're doing personal work, inner work, dealing with trauma or dealing with karmic entanglements and all the rest of it, and we're going deeper into our subconscious and the lower levels, again, I will refer back to the Greek mythology, that, there's a story of, uh, what was his name in Greek? Hades, the god of the underworld, and his capture of Persephone and bringing her down into the underworld. Well, this is a restating of the Sumerian and the Egyptian. So what is hell? Hell is the subconscious, the unconscious level where the disembodiment of thought forms and demons and all the rest of it exists and attached to us, that we have to really integrate and do the cleansing and the balancing and the reintegration of our whole being. And it's outpictured in these stories of the gods and the mythologies and so forth. And it goes from the Sumerian, where Enki was supposedly Enki in the Sumerian syllabary has two syllables, En and Ki. En means priest or Lord.
Mhm.
Ki means the earth. You know that better than everybody. Sovereign Ki, the sovereign earth. So Enki is the Lord of the world, of the earth. And his brother, supposedly, Enlil, is the priest of the sound. And Lil basically means sound. This is where you get the female consort of Yahweh, Lilith. It's all about, it's the re stating of the true feminine principle into some sort of goddess form, as Lilith is the consort of Yahweh. Well, Yahweh is nothing more than the twin of Osiris, known as Set in the Egyptian, and he's none other than Enlil as the brother of Enki. So you have the god of light, Enki, and you have the god of dominance and control, Enlil, who became Set, and Osiris, who eventually became Yahweh and quote unquote um, Lucifer, and basically, the God of the Bible, it's hard to say for you Bible believers, is basically who you know as Satan, which is basically the two names Set and Anu, Set Anu,
Mhm.
and then you got the English phrase, everything is born anew, because
Mhm.
it's the restating of the God of this world. And I hate to tell you guys who are locked into the Bible, the God of the Bible is actually Set, who was Enlil, who was Anu. They were all clones. So in Anton Park's work, Enki, who was originally known as Sa'am, um, was um, was the initial clone of Anu. Then Enki created out of his genetics a clone who became his brother Enlil, who basically took the dark path, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it all is a derivative from the seven reptilian lords that split off from the original unified field, and the priestesses, the dark stars, maintain a you know holding and
Mm-hmm.
preserving the original knowledge or knowing the secret of the true darkness, which is the void, which is the mother, which is the the what Chief Ironbush calls the triple black seed of the mother. And so transliterated from what Chief Ironbush talks about, this morphed into the Sumerian storyline. And so, then the story goes that Set murdered Osiris, cut him up into 14 parts, and Isis found all the 14 parts but couldn't find the 15th, which was the phallus. So she created the artificial phallus, birthed Horus out of that, and all the rest of that story. And then everybody thinks, oh, well, Enki or Ea or Horus is the prodigal son, and so he's the son of light and the son of Osiris, so he must be the good guy. Well, no, that's just the father-son story that's overlaid that's got
Mm-hmm.
all the New Age guys running around worshiping love and light,
Mm-hmm.
and oh, the gods of the light, no, it's just the
Mm-hmm.
false light. It's the whole split male, because this is how the whole original split of the masculine and hardwiring it into our genetics to pre-program us, especially in this
Yeah.
time of harvesting, into basically debasing our will and becoming compliant and
Mm-hmm.
consensual to be controlled by the AI God.
Brilliant. So now when we apply this to day, I just have some really rudimentary questions
Yeah.
that we can start seeing how this affects us in the most minor of ways. Because even when you go to use anything on the computer, you have to agree to terms and conditions um, that are ridiculous, okay? Just
Mhm.
on the most basic level. Anything and everything you do, you have to sign. You have to sign. You have to sign an agreement. So, rudimentary question where they have everybody signing with you capitalizing your name, right? As per the law, what are ways that we're being how shall I say, captured in our daily lives with
Mhm.
the most basic of things like signing your signature?
Yeah. Um, well, let's start to answer that by expanding to the most expanded level.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, we are we are in a universe. Okay.
Mhm.
A universe is a one verse. It's not the universe. It's
Mhm.
just one universe.
Mhm.
In creation, there are vast amounts of multiplicities of universe, what we call the
Mhm.
multiverse. Creation is constantly creating out of itself, moving out into more and more
Mhm.
diversification of expression of creation and so forth. And that occurs in manifested creational fields, where creation is manifested by creator beings, co-creator beings who emerged out of source, remain and stand as source and are co-creators within a creational field. And so, in my perspective, my research, both inwardly and outwardly, I've come to know, just my knowing,
Mhm.
anybody can say, yes, that resonates, or no, I don't agree with that. That's fine. But for me, in my expression and perception of creation, We are in a experimental universe. That experiment is based on the hardwiring or the endowment in every individuated expression of source and creation, the endowment of absolute sovereign free will. So this is where the whole discussion of will and debasing will and saying it's my will that thy will be done and all the rest of that, that the world system, in terms of law, in terms of money, in
Mhm.
terms of the elite, in terms of those who sit on top of the elite, in terms of all the beings all the way up to Enlil and Anu and all the rest of it, they all know that we're in a creational field that is fundamentally founded upon and hardwired on the principle, the universal principle that is immutable as universal law, the principle of each individuated expression as a living being is hardwired, endowed with sovereign free will. So within that context, there is only one rule in law, whether it's at a larger galactic level or any level you want to talk about, or a solar system level or a planetary system, or your neighborhood or your relationship with the people who you live with in the room next door, that all law is contract.
Mhm.
So here's where we ground it in and understand the beginning of how to understand real law.
Mhm.
Because if every being is endowed with sovereign free will, there's only one way to come together to co-create. It's on mutual consent, mutual agreement, mutual benefit, the principles of contract.
Mhm.
Contract says there must be full disclosure, there must be a meeting of the minds, that everything is disclosed,
Mhm.
and you understand the contract equally to what I understand, and there must be just consideration, meaning a just exchange of value that makes sense.
Mhm.
If I agree to buy your car and you want 5,000 Canadian dollars or Federal Reserve dollars, whichever venue we're in, and we agree to exchange. Well, that's a valid contract. It's just consideration because I consider your car worth the
Mhm.
dollars that I give you and vice versa.
Mhm.
And so that's a valid contract. So all law fundamentally is contract.
Mhm.
This is totally enshrined in the United States original constitutions, the
Mhm.
Constitution for the United States of America and everything that was constructed in North America that basically got flipped and converted into a homogeneous, uniform
Mhm.
legal system throughout the entire world.
Mhm.
But fundamentally, it's based on the way it was constructed in the 1770s, 80s, and the 90s. And in the federal constitution, in Article 1, which states what the powers of the Congress will be, there's a clause that says no state can impair the obligation of contract. Okay. Obligation of contract is the same thing as saying just consideration, meeting of the minds. We have an obligation to each other on the basis of what we agree to as
Mhm.
sovereign free will beings. So we come together in contract, we create our own law,
Mhm.
and we establish the basis of obligation of each party, whether it's 2 or 8 billion. Okay.
Mhm.
So they recognize that they have to build a law form based on contractual obligation as paramount and sacrosanct, that the state cannot impair any valid contract. So that's what we have built the private society known as Panterra Vida
Mhm.
on the fundamental of private contract. The body politic of Panterra is a private contract association. There's a lot of people out there bastardizing that concept, which I personally initiated quite a while ago,
Mhm.
15 or more years ago. And that's as private contract.
Mhm.
We're a private society. We come together by mutual consent and benefit and so forth by private contract. And we have the right of association.
Mhm.
We call that a PCA. So, and by structuring it that way, the external public system cannot come in and attempt to impair the obligations of our contract. So
Mhm.
that's fundamental. So we use the basis of the universality of societies,
Mm-hmm.
we make it private. We utilize the universality of the sanctity of obligations of contract. We make it private, and so forth. So, so that's um, that's your beginning point of understanding how law has been set up. So we can take that and define the difference between law, lawful, and legal. So legal has to do with something called allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The root of legal is leg, which also is similar to the root of ligere,
Mm-hmm.
ligere, a Latin word which means to bind.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get religion, to bind again, to bind by contract to the law of the priest.
Mm-hmm.
So from birth onward, we are acquiescing. First, our parents as they start at one point as lawful parents, but they get converted to legal guardians.
Mm-hmm.
And but the root of ligere for binding again, religion, religering, and then the word legislation, legislature, allegiance, pledge of allegiance to the flag that we do in the
Mm-hmm.
States, oath of allegiance to the crown when the king gives a land grant to his lords, his lord of the land,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a baron or a prince or a duke or whatever, they pledge an oath of allegiance. That's the fundamental of the word legal. Allegiance, allegiance, legislation, legal, and so forth. So when we are birthed into the matrix and our mothers act as what's defined in birth registration as the informant, she is taking the living being and putting he or she into a form that becomes a registered asset under the crown through a form of an oath of allegiance. At the higher level, the landed gentry, the elite, and so forth, they issue what's called or they engage what's called an oath of fealty, which means loyalty. To have fidelity or fealty to the crown or to the king, that's an oath of fealty. It all gets down to allegiance. So when we are signing something, we're already so far into having confirmed and reconfirmed thousands of times, through daily life,
Mm-hmm.
our consent to be bound to the legislative control of Congress or Parliament to the codes and the statutes and the requirements to maintain ourselves within the domestic jurisdiction, the domestic sandbox
Mm-hmm.
that's controlled by Parliament
Mm-hmm.
or Congress. And in your case, in Canada, it's Parliament. It goes back to Westminster,
Mm-hmm.
and the root of that historically goes back to 1066 when this guy named Billy or William the Conqueror came over and conquered London basically and took over the realm and started putting his Norman lords and so forth onto the land. And they initiated, or he initiated something called the Domesday, or some people call it the Doomsday Book.
Mm-hmm.
And what that was a cataloging of all of the land and all of the land holdings, all of the estates and the lords and so forth that had to pledge allegiance, oath of fealty to William and his descendancy, which started the City of London, eventually became Westminster and Parliament and all of the rest of it to create all the legislation that bind us to the contracts and everything you asked about every time we sign something. And um, and I'm going to get to the punchline with this, where
Mm-hmm.
it grounds into our reality right now, here and now. But basically, the Domesday Book created two things primarily. The concept of tenancy, where a landlord who has a estate of land granted by the king or the crown can then establish tenants who are not on the land but are lifted off the land. And see, this gets back to the line of the king And the king or the crown or the descent of king from the gods who gave priesthood authority to the line of the priest to create the
Hmm.
law, gave sovereign standing, supposedly,
Hmm.
to the land. Okay. And
AKA the royal family in London,
the royal lines,
or
yeah.
the royal, all the royal
All
lines.
the
But
royal houses eventually
yeah.
in Europe and so forth. Um, but so tenancy
Hmm.
began in 1086, 87 when the Domesday Book was first put forth and cataloged all the land and created an overlay or a grid system of
Hmm.
cataloging the lords and how many cows he had, how many serfs he had, how many
Hmm.
buildings, whatever. And we have been tenants
Hmm.
lifted off the land ever since that time.
And
Okay.
that's why if you buy a house, it doesn't matter because you don't own it.
Right. Well, you don't
You
even
don't
own
own the
you don't
land.
own your name. The name is a franchise of a
Hmm.
bankrupt entity called a nation state, whether it's Canada, United
Hmm.
States, and whatever. Um, but the other key thing that emerged out of the Domesday Book was the nature of an infant estate. This is very important.
Hmm.
That what you just said, that you don't own anything because your name, once your mother registers you
Hmm.
and then you put into the system of vital statistics and the documentation for that, the
Hmm.
record of live birth, not the birth certificate that comes way after, that's a bond, but the original record of live birth that gets converted to an account under a system of vital statistics that then gets sent from the county to the state or the province level, and then to the national level. In North America, in the province of Ontario, there's a city called Hull, Hull. Well, Hull is where all of the documents from all the birth records from North America, United States, and Canada is all to the city of Hull. And there's another city of Hull in the British Isles in the UK. And what is a hull? Hull. It's the hull of a ship. So all those documentary attachments that were consented to by our mothers are stored in the hull of a ship. That puts us into admiralty and maritime. Those are now cargo of a ship that is basically then at the national level stepped up through the City of London and its accounting systems and its banking and its monetization, and then eventually it goes to the Vatican because the Vatican, going back to 1302, and this nice guy named Pope Innocent, he was very innocent, Innocent the Third, um, issued a papal bull called wait, was it Innocent the Third or he came later? Maybe it wasn't Innocent. Maybe it was Boniface. Anyways, whoever the Pope was, you can look it up. He issued a papal bull called the Unum Sanctum, or the Unified Sanctum, or Holy Unification of the papacy, the Vicar of Christ, eventually the doctrine of discovery, and all that that entailed with further papal bulls. But the Unum Sanctum basically said that the Pope claims and now owns irreversibly the all land, all flesh, and all souls of the world to gather what the harvest for supposedly for Christ and all of that storyline, but for another purpose, the harvesting of the souls, to take them into the collapse, the reset, and the recycling, the relooping, as
Hmm.
we've talked about. So how did that get implemented over the next 700 years? Well, eventually you have the City of London and the Crown that was set up under the law of the king to basically claim and control through the Domesday Book all of the land through its landed gentry, lords of the manor, and all the rest of it, and creating both tenancy and the function of infant estates. And I'll come back to infant estates in a minute. But basically, this is all about the Pope's claim in 1302 to own all of the land And eventually all the flesh, where did it get instituted, all the flesh? Through Washington, D.C., through the implementation of the securitization and the bonding through the monetary system of all the franchises that hold property, but that property is all pledged against the global bankruptcy or the worldwide bankruptcy of all the bankrupt nation states that are under the Securities Exchange Commission as subdivisions of the bankrupt United States, securitizing through the issuance of monetized debt through all the corporations and franchises, all the people and the property, or the persons. People as living beings get converted to juristic persons. And what is a person? A person comes from Greek persona, per, through, sona, sound. Those were the masks in the Greek theater through which the mask of the personality that was a character would speak, persona. So your person is only a persona, which also relates back to Persephone. Persephone also means persona on the feminine. The capture of Hades bringing the persona or the persons or Persephone down into the underworld that eventually was reached a compromise agreement where Persephone could go live in the third dimension on the earth for 6 months of the year, but she then had to go down into the underworld or the second dimension with Hades for the other 6 months of the year. Now that relates back to Osiris and Horus, because Osiris was the lord of the underworld, okay? And which was fluid in nature because you go to this place, this temple called Abydos, and there's this temple called, the city called Abydos is a temple called the Osirian, which is a temple where it's all underwater, where they would bring initiates and they would train them to go underwater and swim with crocodiles and all kinds of things like that, to be able to move through the subconscious so they could control that in the underworld where the gods came out of. So the flipping, of course, the mythology of our modern time is that there's extraterrestrials. They came from above, but no, they came from underneath. And NASA actually, the four letters NASA stands for the four gods of the world in the Egyptian Ennead, which is 9 gods, the head of which was Anu. And then there's the four gods, which represented the four substances of earth, water, air, and fire. But then you have Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, and Set, the gods of the light, Isis and Osiris, and the god and goddess of the dark, Nephthys and Set. But Isis and Osiris were also known as a Set and Asar. Isis was known as a Set. Osiris was known as Asar. That's where the root of Asar, or Asar is the root of words like Caesar or Kazar or Zar. Okay, that's the masculine god or the god of light, the false light, the prodigal son who rose in the form of Horus. So you have Nephthys, Aset, Set, and Asar. Their initials are NASA. Okay. This is the whole Isis Osiris mystery cult, controlling the minds of the population to think there's outer space and all the rest of it, when in fact it's all what we're describing here. And so the whole thing is set up for one purpose. Sovereign free will, the power of our signature to be placed into a physical containment or construct that we would call, that is called a contract, to lock us into consensual attachment to their entire system. Including and going all the way back to the Eden, and the Eden when the Adam was defeated by the gods and so forth, and forced into that contract that I discussed, that Anton Parks has brought forward, that binds our genetics to this day. But we are in a sovereign free will reality, universe.
Mm-hmm.
We are hardwired with sovereign free will. And when in the ever-present moment of now, which is all of eternity, when we're standing as fully resonant eternal beings, which is who we really are, we have the power of rescission. We have two powers in law, in the public system as well as the private side. One is the power of acceptance, the other is power of rescission. Any contract that presumptively is binding and irrevocable is not so.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we become aware of the false nature of the construct and the manipulation, whether that's through genetic manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
mental manipulation, linguistic manipulation, or what have you, that we have the power to rescind our signature from that contract. We are the energizing force. When we enter into all the contracts you're talking about, those are commercial contracts.
Mm-hmm.
They're all tied up in commercial codes and statutes and all the
Mm-hmm.
rest of that. All the codes and statutes are basically the rules for the containment of the civitas, which means the civil body, which basically ultimately means the landless serfs who are lifted off the land and are held in a holographic containment
Mm-hmm.
called the civitas. And it's under rules of military occupation and bankruptcy administration.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the nation states, which started as societies, became nation states, became bankrupt corporations, created rules of engagement or management of the bankrupt containment of the people, persons, and property. And if you want to play in that domestic sandbox, you have to sign your signature. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
when you first become aware of the fact that there's constructive fraud,
Mm-hmm.
fraud in the inducement, fraud in the what's the other word? Another type of fraud. They're all the same thing, and that everything that you created was falsely attached by a pledge of bonded surety, meaning that you are the bonded guarantor to underwrite or fulfill the obligation of the contract of all the debt when you accepted commercial paper that we
Mm-hmm.
call Canadian dollars, United States Federal Reserve notes, blah, 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 that we're the surety to that. We agreed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We created all of this equity that we have abandoned because when we were put into this documentary form of the registration of birth and up to the whole and then up to the Vatican, there was not a meeting of the minds. There was not full disclosure. Our mothers didn't know what they were doing. They
Mm-hmm.
were told that they had to do that. Now, today, mothers have to agree to have their newborn shot with hepatitis B shots and get a social security number or SIN number in Canada or social insurance, et cetera, within 24 hours. Okay. And because the parents, they're not really parents. They're the birthing vessel. They're the seed donor and the egg donor, and then the birthing vessel. The birthing vessel is really a maritime reference to the fact that the baby inside the womb is floating in the seas of commerce
Mm-hmm.
under the Holy See and will be birthed through a canal and received at the port by the dock and then put into the containment system. All of that was based on tacit or passive consent, but we were never formally
Mm-hmm.
disclosed, given full meeting of the minor disclosure. So this is the education that we have built for the last 30 years. It's now integrated into University as a Panterra member.
Mm-hmm.
And to become a general education member, one goes to Freedom Absolute or substack.freedomabsolute.com or Freedom Absolute on YouTube and basically subscribes, and then you have access to GEM University. That's the beginning of the grounding to start integrating all of this knowledge. This took me 60 to 70 years to figure out and to fully integrate. It's taken the last 15 years to basically put into a learning form, educational form in our university, online university. And we've gone through a lot of shit, a lot of,
Hmm.
attacks and undermining and everything else. But we've got a really great foundation of teams now that are really dedicated. And we work with new members, and we have a very succinct way of bringing people through the
Hmm.
sequence of steps to start opening up this education. And the key about the education is, yes, it's intellectual or it's at the mental
Hmm.
level, but it's also internal
Hmm.
because all of the mirrored false legal and monetary system is a similitude or an obverse mirroring reflection of the original template of life. We have the capacity to return and claim our life, re-embody our life, and sever the attachment and remove the presumption of consent
Hmm.
that we have tacitly given the government system, the monetary system, and all the rest of it. So people will ask, well, yeah, but then how do I live in the matrix but not of it?
Hmm.
And that's what we teach. And that's what we provide support, guidance, and education and application how to do that. And it's not an easy course. It takes a
Hmm.
lot of consistency, persistence, and real commitment.
Hmm.
But if you're really committed to your true being, and this is what you want to be free of from all this entrapment and all this bondage, I know of no other
Hmm.
place anywhere in this reality to find the most integrated, comprehensive education and grounded step-by-step steps of how to actually unwind it. And as you unwind it externally, you're also doing the inner work to unwind it internally. So back to we have the power to
Hmm.
accept, we have the power to rescind. What they really want is our energetic, unique signature frequency to come through our physical embodiment, through our, you know, mental body, emotional body into the physical, down our arm, whichever hand you use, and put wet ink to paper. That's an energetic attachment to who we are outside of time and space that is put into the legal system. But also in the legal system, we have what's called the 3-day right of rescission. This is hardwired in the codes and the statutes. It's in the United States in an act called Truth in Lending Act, which is um, acronym is TILA. And basically, it's truth in lending that you have to reveal everything in, if you're buying a house, in the escrow agreement, in the deed of trust, in consumer loans, and everything. And in that um, language in all of these binding contracts,
Hmm.
they have to reveal truth in lending. It's called the Truth in Lending Act. And in all of them, I'm sure there's a corresponding act in Canada and Australia and the UK and all the Commonwealth countries, because we're in the time of we're in the end times where everything has to be revealed. They have to give every being the opportunity to rescind their signature, rescind, remove their consent, sever the attachments, and remove or nullify the presumption of consent.
Hmm.
So it's all hidden in plain sight. It's becoming more and more revealed, and this is a part of it. So Truth in Lending says you have 3 days from the moment you put your signature to rescind that signature. That will nullify the contract. It will remove your unique signature frequency as a unique being of creation, source connected and everything. People will say, yeah, but I signed those contracts years ago. But that 3 days
Hmm.
is not just 3 days. It is the 3 days can start the minute you step up and you timely and properly say, I've just become aware of new information that changes the entirety of that contract I entered into that did not give me full disclosure or a proper meeting of the minds.
Hmm.
So that 3 days can start 50 years after you sign something. And this is what we do in our processes, status correction and everything. And what we teach people is that when you rescind a signature, it resonates throughout all of creation.
Mhm.
So you're not just doing, oh, I want to be in the private, I want to have more access to money or get rid of my debt. No, this is liberating your entire being
Mhm.
throughout all of creation, throughout every incarnation, throughout every false reality you may have been entrapped in or your genetics were taken into, that you can use specific um, um, statements of rescission. You know, we went through that last time a bit, and rescinding all vows, agreements, contracts that do not serve me in this eternal moment of now for
Mhm.
my highest and best good, and any variation on that. So that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the grounding is. This is, where it can basically start. On
So
the
if
other,
you, oh, sorry.
let me just finish this. So on the other side is the power of acceptance.
Mhm.
Every contract that you enter into, whether it's a contract that you click a button to accept terms and conditions on the internet
Mhm.
or everything, all of those are signatory or virtual signatures, DocuSign, or whatever, accepting terms to be on Zoom calls or the
Mhm.
internet, I mean,
Mhm.
Gmail or what have you. They all ultimately they all ultimately root back to that primary contract that was created by the registration of the birth and everything else that follows from that. Because these mega corporations
Mhm.
have contracts and agreements with the Treasury that they are licensed to monetize their client base, the data, everybody who signs that agreement, terms and conditions, and all the
Mhm.
rest of it. They are using all of that, tying it back to the Treasury, tying it back to the original initiation of the binding nature of our bonded surety status
Mhm.
to the bankrupt franchise. And this is why the gathering of everybody's personal information through, you know,
Mhm.
23andMe, all the genetic gathering, all of the biometrics, all of the virtual signatures and all the
Mhm.
rest of it, it's all then now being attempted to be put into this vast system of AI, all these vast data networks. I mean, data repositories for AI
Mhm.
that they want to join up with nuclear power plants, splitting the atom and opening
Mhm.
up the subconscious and unconscious of the physical matter, tying that into the AI so that the
Mhm.
AI can attempt to embody the physical and to capture the flesh and capture the souls to basically become,
Mhm.
the false god, the god of light that's carried by the fiber optics that carries light, the speed of light, and all the rest of that. But embedded in all of that is
Mhm.
the equity that's created in the every act that we do every single day. Literally now the breath we take.
Mhm.
Carbon tax is to tax the breath so that we can, when we release carbon, we have to pay a tax on it. Okay. So they're taxing the breath, they're taxing our genetics, they're taxing us when we eat, when we sleep, when we
Mhm.
do all of our biological functions, and all the virtual contracts and all the rest of it. It's all to get that tithe and tax that
Mhm.
goes back to the plane of Eden when that binding oath was created. We have the right to rescind that oath. I didn't agree to that. You didn't agree to that.
Mhm.
Maybe it's in our genetics, but we can rescind that original binding presumption of consent. And that will literally open up our genetics so that we can start accessing the epigenetics and start transmuting and transforming so that we are a bigger, wider vessel for our true being, our authentic self, to come into this physical body, and through which we then co-create and start literally shifting this entire creational field back to its original template of life. And so the power of acceptance is that for every act There's a monetized debt that's attached to the franchise that we're the surety for on the public side to create circulating medium that we call money, which is monetized debt. But there is no money. There's only a debit and credit graph that's a zero sum at the bottom. Every debit has to be matched by a credit, which would be called equity. That equity is in the underlying ancestral estate that our mother voluntarily gave to the state, but we can reclaim it. We can reclaim it energetically, we can reclaim it lawfully, and by proper steps in the earth system,
Mm-hmm.
by administrative procedures and notices, we can return standing to our own self and reclaim that estate. In that estate is all the equity we've created,
Mm-hmm.
everything we've created that
Mm-hmm.
they split into two realities. Debt over here that we're
Mm-hmm.
bonded to, and credit, which is equitable interest and the rights of the beneficiary that we don't have unless we claim that estate.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all the power to to claim that equity, do the steps required, and then, um, shatter that glass wall that separates the two, be able to settle all the liabilities against our flesh that is then used to tie us up, whether we're in body or out of body, so that the papal system can harvest our souls and put us in a containment field so that they can then have all that inventory to reincarnate when the collapse
Mm-hmm.
and the plasma dome is collapsed, wipes out the life on the planetary surface while they're underground, and
Mm-hmm.
then they come back up and they do it again, and they're the
Mm-hmm.
gods again, and they start over, and then they start repopulating the souls into the containment of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the whole system works.
So my mind will go to the practical aspect. So you can rescind this stuff, but where are the changes? I mean, it's like if you want to rescind your birth certificate, your social insurance number, or your social security number, your car license, rescind so that you are not a tenant on the land when you buy a house, that you don't have to pay taxes because that's theft. What I'm seeing is that I am not witnessing the result of
Mhm.
a manifestation with that rescinding it, because I have heard of people who have tried doing that, but they still have to drive a car. They're still paying taxes. They haven't been able to, there's a few examples, right, of people who have managed to, not be a tenant on the land and actually own it. And that's like it's problematic to begin with, owning land. But anyway,
Well, yeah.
so we're still living in this society. So what does that look like when you actually rescind in terms of all of that? Like just the basics,
Mhm.
just right?
Well, first of all, this is where the education comes in. It's a priori, it's
Mm-hmm.
paramount.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just did a logical response to what I said.
Mm-hmm.
You said, well, you rescind the birth certificate, you rescind
Driver's
uh,
license, yeah,
the social insurance number. You
yeah,
didn't mention the driver's
yeah.
license, but I'll get to that. But there's a distinction. You have
Mm-hmm.
to know what to rescind and
Mm-hmm.
what to accept. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, the birth certificate is not the actual repository of the record from which and within which the public debt is created and
Mm-hmm.
the separation on the private side of the equitable interests in the underlying estate.
Mm-hmm.
I've called for about 10 or
Mm-hmm.
11 years that underlying estate, the ancestral estate, and
Mm-hmm.
a lineal estate. What is lineal? It's a line in time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ancestral means before me, before I had this body and the genetics of my matrilineal ancestry and
Mm-hmm.
my patrilineal mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The only thing that we have as a true living estate is this body
Mm-hmm.
and the genetics in it and the living library of the entirety of our lineal ancestry that is here in this body that we largely don't have access to,
Mm-hmm.
but they have a certain
Mm-hmm.
technology, they can access it. That's why they have everybody do 23andMe and they have, capturing DNA in all kinds of ways and blah, blah, blah. They have vast uh, computational capability to create the similitude.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they did COVID, they didn't have an actual virus, they just had a computer construct of the
Mm-hmm.
virus. They do the same with our genetics.
Mm-hmm.
They can't actually access the living library of who we really are
Yeah.
in this incarnational form, but we can give them permission to create a clone, basically a duplicate in computational digital binary code,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. But they can't own this. They can't own the land. You said, well,
Mm-hmm.
we can own the land. Nobody owns the land
No.
because it's a living being. We're here co-creationally by a contract with the
Mm-hmm.
mother, with the earth. These beings are not here by a contract, and what they presume to be contractual nexus has been made null and void, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they're basically imploding on themselves and all the rest of that. But see, long ago, when they infiltrated and the parasite came into this creational field and began to infiltrate it and enter into the treaty contract that we discussed last time,
Mm-hmm.
or last two sessions, but mainly the last one,
Mm-hmm.
um, that there was a agreement to allow them in, and they started then gathering contractual agreements with a vast number of beings and all of their descendancy in terms of ancestral lineal
Mm-hmm.
descendancy, which is why there are so many beings today that are completely mind wiped, that are just basically in a Borg hive mind state, that are just one and equal, the same with the state mind or the AI mind, because of contracts that went back long ago. And those contractual agreements were underwritten or founded upon, yes, when we become the Godhead of this creation, you will have standing, or you will have the bennies of the physical reality. They did that with the top level, the elite, the royals, and all the bloodlines and stuff. And they did it down with the middle management down to the worker bees. So, so the agreement is, okay, if I agree and I follow all your rules, your codes and statutes, you're going to give me some sort of position in this. But yeah, but did you read the fine print where it said that we can basically harvest your flesh and your soul and just recycle you into the next reiteration of the timeline? Oh, I didn't have my glasses. I didn't read the fine print.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but those contracts are now basically null and void by beings such as you and I and many others, many who are listening to this, who have gone deep enough and substantiated themselves incarnationally in this embodied form to have fuller and fuller access to the living library
Mm-hmm.
and to start severing and nullifying those contracts. We're withdrawing our consent
Mm-hmm.
based on what we talked about last time, the treaty and
Yeah.
everything, from being the biocrystalline virtual reality projecting units from which they could
Mm-hmm.
parasitically attach to run their movie and we would create it. So the more and more we talked about last time, the more and more of us who withdraw that, the true beings, the real beings, the prime beings, withdrawing that, it's exponential. One prime being who withdraws completely,
Mm-hmm.
rescinds that primary signature, withdraws it completely, it's exponentially magnified by 1,000-fold or 10,000 or whatever, and that's an exponential inverse implosion of the false overlay reality, and we can see it happening in real time now. So this is the power of rescission. But you have to understand, and this is where education comes in, and really knowing where you are, who you are, and how to do what needs to be done. So when you say, well, I've seen some people and they kind
Mm-hmm.
of do this, but they blah, blah, blah. Well, you're looking at somebody who's been living totally in the private, who is the overseer holding the office that holds all the assets and the interests for the mission and purpose of Panterra as a private society. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they leave me alone. I've had the SEC show up and the
Mm-hmm.
FBI and the IRS and others. And I politely told them, you know, you have no authority here, you have no jurisdiction, and I'm still standing. And we have been doing quite a lot
Mm-hmm.
with Panterra. There's a lot more story about that, but that's another time. But I am a living example
Mm-hmm.
of the perfection of the true standing that I teach. I walked the talk. I've been doing it for 35 years. That's totally integrated in the education and the processes within GEM University and within Panterra Vida. So the problem that's out there is you've got hundreds
Mm-hmm.
and thousands and probably tens of thousands of people who've learned only part of the structure, the story. It's like the five men and the elephant. You know, one guy
Mm-hmm.
says, well, it's a tree, or it's a rope, or it's a hose, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or it's a big leaf, you know. They don't have the whole system. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I've watched it for 30 plus years, how people get one piece and then they run
Mm-hmm.
with it and they usually monetize it and they market
Mm-hmm.
it. And you've got people all over the place selling, you know, different forms of this is the remedy, this is the remedy, this is the remedy, but it's not a full
Mm-hmm.
comprehensive remedy. So back to what you said rescinding the birth certificate. You can't rescind the birth certificate. The birth certificate belongs to the Vatican, the City of London, the nation state in which the registration took place. It's inventoried because the registration created a person,
Mm-hmm.
the persona,
Mm-hmm.
the Persephone, the false feminine, the
Mm-hmm.
false masculine,
Mm-hmm.
masculine
Mm-hmm.
of what we think is who we are within the matrix. A birth certificate is just that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a certificate. The word certificate in law means evidence of a private trust and evidence of debt. You can't rescind it. It's a bond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's got value to it, but you have to know how to accept it. You accept the embedded equitable value,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to know what to do with it and where to place it and how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is what we teach. So you actually do rescind the driver's license because the driver license gives you a license to be a driver in commerce, to drive the vessel that's called your name
Mm-hmm.
on the sea of commerce
Mm-hmm.
that has everything to do with military occupation and bankruptcy administrative management. So you got to know what to rescind, and you got to know what to accept. This is what you learn with our
So
education.
do they give you something when you rescind the driver's license that, you know, is more in
Get out
line
of
with,
jail, get out of jail
yeah,
free
yeah,
card?
yeah.
No,
So when you rescind your driver's, because, you know, I do know people want to know practicalities of this. They want to know how it's applied
sure.
to things that
Well,
they can relate to.
yeah. Well, the bottom line is the people out there, the ones listening to this
Mm-hmm.
discussion, and the vast number of thousands and millions of people who want to be free,
Mm-hmm.
who know that they're not free, that they know that something is inherently
Yeah.
seriously wrong, but don't know what to find even the path to walk the
Mm-hmm.
steps. You know, to be blunt, there is no place you will learn
Mm-hmm.
comprehensively all that you need to do except for in University in Panterra Vida Society. I've been through this for close to 4 decades. I've watched
Mm-hmm.
masters who I learned from in the 90s and 2000s think they knew what they were doing, and they went to prison for 5, 10, 20 years, some of them, because they didn't know certain things. I learned from them. I stepped back. I didn't do the stupid things that a lot of people did that got them indicted and thrown in prison. And I learned from what they
Wow.
did, and I finally figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured it out for a number of reasons. One, because 55 years ago, when I was 16, I had, for lack of a better term, a quantum explosion of awareness that just blew all the gaskets out of my 3D
Mm-hmm.
16-year-old mind. And I experienced the whole thing. I experienced the split of reality. I experienced the the dark side and the true side,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know nearly what I know now, but I knew it in a whole being
Mm-hmm.
level, and it was like, as
Mm-hmm.
I've described it many times, I was taken to the top of the highest mountain, given the full 360-degree view, but I had no integration in my mental body, my emotional, or my physical even. It drove me crazy, which
Mm-hmm.
I was crazy on and off for a couple of years. But then I got back to the bottom of the mountain
Mm-hmm.
and I got back into my body and my 3D reality and knew inherently now I've got to walk up the mountain. I've got to take every step and I've got to integrate it. And that's what I've done for the last basically 53 years. And then when I started studying law 35, 36 years ago, that's what galvanized me, especially law and then history and then money
Mm-hmm.
and integrating the esoterica until I had a whole system and a complete
Mm-hmm.
multi-layered puzzle that I could see every piece and I could see the inner dynamics of all those pieces. It's taken me 20 to 30 years to get a certain level of shattering some of the most external layers of the program. Most people resist me and what they think is me trying to force them to give up what they hold dear,
Mm-hmm.
their sacred cows, which you take the word sacred, you mix the letters around, you get scared, and you
Mm-hmm.
take scared and you combine it with cows and you get scared hamburgers, and that's what most people are. They're scared hamburgers. They've been put through the grinder and they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
The coherency of our education and the sequence of steps will give you the empowerment to really actually know who you are within the matrix and within the bigger whole.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just, like I said in the beginning of the conversation, there's no getting around the education. You
Yeah.
can go out in the internet, get these pieces that people are very happy to give you, some, a lot of them for free, but some for charge, and think you're getting somewhere and you're not. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's a guy that recently showed up, and you ever hear of Cal Washington?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's Canadian and he formulated this thing called notice of liability
Mm-hmm.
that he was somewhat successful with, and he was doing this thing to stop smart meters and so forth. But there's just vast flaws in what he teaches people to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's a nice guy. I know he's good-hearted, he means well, but he is leading people like Pied Piper, the lemmings over the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, a few months ago, this guy named Govinda, who seems like a really nice guy, he teaches health and so forth, figured out something that he's going to teach everybody the law. And he did this UCC filing with birth certificates. And then he had this video with Cal Washington about 2 or 3 months ago where Cal's going, oh, it's great. What you've done is perfect. It fits notice of liability, blah, blah, blah. It's the other half. And this guy Govinda is teaching everybody, or teaching, he's not teaching, but he's promoting that what I did, I filed this one little UCC and I claimed everybody's birth certificates, and now you're all free.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to like reference my UCC filing in Texas and you get a get out of free card, get out of jail free. I've watched people do this for 30 plus years. I've
Mm-hmm.
watched time after time messiahs and saviors and people teaching people this is it. You're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah, blah. And they lead thousands of people into the meat grinder. They become scared cows, scared hamburgers. They're indicted. They're put in jail. They're, taking their assets away, blah, 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 over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But so we've had to go up against resistance after resistance and a lot of attacks and undermining and all the rest of it. But certain things have happened in recent months. Things have shifted. We're finding that there's a foundational substantiation of everything that you and I have talked about these 3 sessions that is now going to accelerate our ability. For one, the programming is falling away faster from people's minds. The crystallization of the false reality is broken up enough that people are breaking through it. And so, I can just only say I really encourage people
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
become a member of Panterra Vida, to go to freedomabsolute.substack.com, subscribe to the Substack. You can do it on Patreon, and then you get access to the general education level, the foundational knowledge, and it is a synchronous, integrated, both physical and multidimensional spiritual path of breaking free and re-embodying our true capacity as the real creators, the real beings in this reality, and basically shattering the illusions of the false narrative, the false light against the false dark, and this whole Isis Osiris
Mm-hmm.
mystery cult of, all the
Mm-hmm.
rest of it, everything we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a great part three. I don't know if you want to end it with anything.
Mm.
Maybe.
Do you have any
Yeah, I mean,
pressing questions?
there's always questions. I always have questions. I think talking about its application in the physical 3D reality is always like very good. And I think in my mind, I have many questions
Yeah.
related to that.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Well,
maybe.
there's one point where you
Mhm,
asked about driving a car, this,
mhm,
that, the other. Um, our solution is a full, multifaceted, comprehensive solution. I can't go into the detail because that's what the education is.
mhm,
Our master law course is a 2-year course, and that's really foundational. This is a lifetime commitment to oneself
mhm,
to really learn about the matrix and the code of the matrix and where you are within it
mhm,
and how you can reconfigure or resituate yourself where you truly are capable of moving seamlessly through the matrix,
mhm,
but not being attached or of it. Attached to the matrix is all the contracts.
mhm,
You learn how to rescind the contracts that you need to rescind. You learn how to claim what you
mhm,
need to claim. You learn how to accept what you need to accept. And you don't drive around with, you know, plates that say "Kingdom of Me" and get pulled over by the cop and say, "Well, it's my own kingdom, and you're a vassal, and leave. I'm the sovereign. Leave me alone."
mhm,
And he says, "Well, get out of the car, put on these bracelets, and come with me. Tell it to the judge." You know.
mhm,
You don't do that. You
mhm,
learn how to move seamlessly and fluidly through the matrix. You learn how to manage a new estate. That is
mhm,
part of our master law course, how to restructure your debts and liabilities, and
mhm,
as well as your assets so that they're not bonded and attached to the franchise estate that you operate currently with and through. You learn how to do all that so that you can move through the system, use the system to your benefit, and know what to do with it, know what to do with the debts and liabilities,
mhm,
and know what to do with creating new assets and creating asset protection and all the rest. This has been going on for hundreds and thousands of years.
mhm,
The elite know how to do it. The privileged know how to do it.
mhm,
They know how to structure their affairs where essentially they own nothing but control everything. That's
mhm,
the formula for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all the rest of it.
mhm,
I just studied all of that. I learned how to set it up where you own nothing, quote unquote, in the name that they own
mhm,
so that they don't own what you have created anymore, and then how
mhm,
to use it, how to have standing on the land, how not to say, I own the land
Mm-hmm.
and I own it in a allodial title, which is bullshit. It's a
Mm-hmm.
misconstruction of words that people have learned. How to really establish living where your resonant standing is resonant and synchronous with the mother, with the living earth,
Mm-hmm.
and with all of creation, with all the cosmos. How to re-embody your sovereign free will,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't mean, you do all the stupid things that most people who think they're being solvent or sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
you are doing, because
Mm-hmm.
in this reality, you're not sovereign, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But you can be solvent. Being solvent means you are not attached or bonded to any debt in their system. When you're not attached to any debt in the system, they can't harvest you.
Mm-hmm.
They harvest you because you have a debt, a contractual debt monetized obligation to fulfill that you don't fulfill at the time of your death.
Mm-hmm.
So they can own the flesh or control it while you're still living in these bodies, and they can harvest the soul and recycle you based on karmic obligations that are synonymous with monetary obligations. That's the
Mm-hmm.
system. Bonding on the physical through the course of a life from birth until death, and then resituating the contract of that unfulfilled obligation that you died leaving, and then attaching karmic
Mm-hmm.
obligations. So then you get to be, then they control the soul. They put you in the recycling center, and
Mm-hmm.
then they wait until the proper time to plug you back in to a bonded obligation incarnation again.
Mm-hmm.
So the more of us who do this and sever all of that we've talked about in this conversation, the more imploded the matrix becomes. And at a certain point, we take back the power of creation within this creational field. And then we really start creating what people like to
Mm-hmm.
say is the new earth and all the rest of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, so that's what it
Okay.
is.
So, in how the you were saying that the elites, they've mastered how not to own anything and yet control everything, right? Um, is it them doing the trust funds, is that a part of how they function?
Mhm.
Right. Okay.
I would like to show you the real
Oh.
master of Panterra. Hello,
Oh,
Django.
he's so beautiful. Look at his eyes.
Yep.
Oh, I love, well, my dogs, I don't know where they are. They, because it would be cute to have them all kind of here at the end of this today.
Say hello
So
to him. His
cute.
name's Django.
Django, your name suits you. You are a little Django.
Yes, he is. He was named after Django Reinhardt, who was a famous gypsy guitarist.
Oh, the guitarist. Yeah, that's right. Great guitarist.
Hmm.
Yeah, but his name does suit him. Well, that's a good place to leave it today.
Yeah.
Kind of a good synopsis.
Yep. Well, there's one more thing that I thought of earlier that I didn't get to, but we'll leave it with this. So the Pope at that time, 1302, declared he and his successors um, own all land, flesh, and souls. And then I described how through the line
Hmm.
of the king, you have all of the crown, city of London, presumptively owning the land, but they really don't. They
Hmm.
don't own the
Hmm.
land. What they
Yes.
have done is they've taken what I described as the Domesday Book. They've created the concept and the construct of infant estates. And in law, an infant has no standing, so he must have a regent or an executor of the estate. That's what Parliament was created for.
Hmm.
Congress is just a derivative of that. It's the same thing. They started as the constitutional structure, but they just turned Congress into the same crap that we see what's
Hmm.
going on today and in the last 100 years and more. But basically, it's all about creating the trusteeship
Mm-hmm.
vested in the crown, in the queen, because if you look up a phrase um, which says Her Majesty when Elizabeth II was queen, and now it's Charlie the King, so it'd be His Majesty, but it's called Her Majesty or His Majesty in right of Canada, something like that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not like getting precise. Um, but just look up His Majesty in right of Canada. It'll come up. That's
Mm-hmm.
a registered corporation, either in the um, Companies House in City of London or in the SEC in Washington, D.C. So that is vested, that corporate entity, which issues bonds against all of the birth certificates of bonding against the obligation of the trust underlying our name in the franchise. That's a collective bonding of the entirety of, the franchise of Canada or the franchise of Australia, New Zealand, United
Yeah.
Kingdom, and so forth. And then it's somewhat different, but essentially the same with the United States. So, so that's the commercial monetary bonding and bondage to the living flesh, with the obligations
Mm-hmm.
of all the contracts and all of the public debt obligations of the franchise that the flesh is bonded to. So, so they can only control the infant estates
Mm-hmm.
of everybody who's in that bondage relationship to the bankrupt nation state and the Rothschild central bank of issue and that whole system. They do not own the land. They cannot have claim to the land because they're a corporate body. A corporate body is a fiction, and fictions cannot have standing on the land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We are living beings. We have original a priori standing on the land because we have an original contractual relationship with the mother and the creation of the manifestation into the biological physical world of this living creational um, uh, reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And remember what we talked about last time that that the so-called treaty that Andrew and I accessed first in 1999, that we thought way back then was that the parasite owned and controlled
Mm-hmm.
everything, and we had to sneak in and create this agreement, blah, blah, blah. It was the other way around. We are the prime creators of this
Yeah.
creational field, this living library that's unique in all of creation with all of its unlimited capacity to create biological living expression.
Mm-hmm.
And take that biological living expression that we would call genetics, and then take it to seed new unmanifest creational fields and create new creation in the
Yeah.
expansion of the eternity, the eternal expression of living creation.
Mm-hmm.
So, so they know they can't
Yeah.
own the land. The Pope could claim it,
Mm-hmm.
and an unrebutted claim will have standing until it is rebutted.
Mm-hmm.
So our claim of our life, our claim of our living landed estate in this embodiment, the genetics and the
Mm-hmm.
ATP mitochondria and all the living systems in our landed estate, our real landed estate. They call, the earls and the barons, they have landed estates. No, that's bullshit. That's just a false reality.
Mm-hmm.
This is the landed estate. Our true
Yeah.
eternal being has landed in this living creation within a co-creative relationship with the mother.
Yeah.
That is the real landed estate. So the only counterpoint to the Pope's claim, 723 years or whatever it's been, is to rebut his claim. He
Mm-hmm.
has no standing to make that claim because he's acting as a false narrative corporate fiction through many false
Yes.
narrative corporate fictions. We are the living creation, prime creators. We have standing to claim
Mm-hmm.
this life, this landed estate, and as stewards of the living substance of the land of the mother,
Yes.
we have that capacity and they don't. So that's part of what we do. So they have this false reality of
Mm-hmm.
this tenancy overlaid on the land, infant estates, that they split the title and they said the queen or the king has, his right of Canada or New Zealand or what
Mm-hmm.
have you. And that's what the reality that they've programmed everybody in over the last 7 years that is now imploding and you know dissolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the counterpoint of the papacy's claim to supposedly claim all the land. The
Mm-hmm.
next one is the claim of the flesh. How does that function? Well, as I talked about, there's two pillars, the law of the priest, which is
Mm-hmm.
the binding of the flesh. We agree to the law of the
Mm-hmm.
all the priests, the medical priests, the
Mm-hmm.
judicial, all the priests. But that's where we sever that attachment. We rescind all those presumptions of consent and all the rest
Mm-hmm.
of it. But it's binding to the flesh of most of the beings on the planet, humanoid beings. Where do they gather it? They gather it around the pole or the
Mm-hmm.
pillar that's the law of the priest. It's called the maypole, that
Mm-hmm.
the children are taught to wind the ribbon of the genetics around
Mm-hmm.
the castrated male or the phallus that was the phallus of Osiris that Isis had to create a artificial phallus in order to birth the prodigal son or the rising sun or the horizon or on the horizon of
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And that's the binding or the gathering of the flesh. May 1st is what? It's the All Workers' Day. All the workers, the worker bees who must reaffirm their agreement to the or the global communist state, going all the way back to the Eden, where those defeated Adamic original ancestors were put under the binding agreement that they had to give tithe and taxes and so forth. All workers' day. We will work and create the physical world, but it all belongs to the state, the
Mm-hmm.
communist state. Okay, so that's the pole of the pillar of the priest.
Mm-hmm.
Look on the so-called circular orbit 6 months later, what do you have? You have November 1st, All Souls Day. You
Mm-hmm.
have Halloween, the gathering of the souls. Then you have All Souls Day. And then you essentially have the settlement of the contract that when the flesh leaves, the souls are gathered 6 months later on the gathering of
Mm-hmm.
the opposite pole, the crown, the pillar, the all saints, the so-called saints.
Mm-hmm.
But as the Rolling Stones said, all saints are sinners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're the sinners. And that's the other pillar. That's the other pole. So you have those two pillars within the false narrative of a global orbit and all the rest of it around the sun, what they say is the
Mm-hmm.
sun. And it's got the arch, the
Mm-hmm.
ark of Anu and Yahweh to
Mm-hmm.
bind the two pillars to its false claim.
And that's interesting because in the Old Testament, Yahweh gives the people a rainbow as the covenant
That's a sign.
symbol.
Yeah, yeah. And what's the rainbow? It's seven frequencies that are perceived by our
Mm-hmm.
senses as seven different colors. What actually are those frequencies? Well, I would put forth that those are the seven reptilian overlords that Anton Parks talked about,
Mm-hmm.
that the Sumerian word is the Umsagal,
Mm-hmm.
and that Anu was the seventh son
Mm-hmm.
or the seventh lord, whose task was to then go gather all of the captured beings.
Mm-hmm.
So there
Exactly.
you have it. So Yahweh said, here's my sign. How
Yep.
will we know you, Lord? Here's the rainbow or the seven
Mm-hmm.
frequencies. That's
Mm-hmm.
how you'll know me
Mm-hmm.
or us.
Yeah.
Elohim, us.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Okay. Um, Brilliant.
And here's one more little interesting fact that I learned from Steve McQuaid, which I mentioned earlier, um, that if you take the four letters YHWH
Mm-hmm.
um, that spells out the tetragrammaton, and the name we
Yahweh.
call
Yeah.
Yahweh,
Hmm.
and you convert them to vowels, the Y becomes an I,
Hmm.
the H becomes an A, and the double V or double U actually becomes a U. So you have I-A-U-A. Now, if you turn that around, which they've done for thousands of years with language, with consonants and vowels and gematria and everything, a letter is a number is a
Hmm.
letter, a vowel is a consonant, and you turn it around and you do all these double entendres and all the rest of it. So you take I-A-U-A and you turn it around so that it's A-U-A-I. Are
Hmm.
you writing that down?
Hmm.
Okay. So you have A-U-A-I,
Hmm.
which is the mirror flip of Yahweh. So then put some consonants in there. A N U A K I. What does that spell?
Anuaki.
Anunnaki.
Yeah.
I forgot an N in there, I think.
And then, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Anunnaki. Hmm.
Anunnaki. So,
Brilliant.
so that's who Yahweh is. It's just a persona
Hmm.
for the Anunnaki or the
Hmm.
gods who were named certain things in Sumer and other names in
Yeah.
Egypt, different names in Babylon, Acadia, all the way through the Greek period, the Roman period, all the way
Yeah.
to what we have today.
Hmm. And that's why, yeah, the Elohim is plural. We, even in like the very beginning in Genesis, like it was always we. There's actually, I can't remember where, but it actually does say we when it was talking, God
Yeah.
talking, right?
Yeah, yeah. But that's interesting with the rainbow. How
Mm-hmm.
will we know you? By the seven
Yep.
frequencies,
Yeah.
okay? Because those frequencies correspond to the seven chakras. They correspond, which are control systems
Mm-hmm.
overlaid, are true
Yeah.
centers. The seven layers, the seven heavens under the firmament, all of it, it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And one last fact, and then we'll close it out. Chief Iron Bush, who, if you haven't looked at, really look at in YouTube. He's quite extraordinary. Um, he and he's an Indian chief of the Lenape or the what's it called? I forget. There's another name. That of the tribe, the Delaware tribe, that are really the keepers of the history, and he's the current holder of the history. He's studied extensively all the different eras of the myths and the gods and the words and the linguistics. He's an amazing being, and so anyways, he understands a lot of the languages. So he said, well, in the current English versions, it says in the beginning, the first three words of Genesis. But in the original language, it's the words or the three words are be reshet. And translated, that means be reset.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Genesis is saying, be reset. And
Mm-hmm.
here's your new template. Here's your new God.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your new Ra Legion, the Legion of Ra.
Mm-hmm.
And here's your terminus point, your book of Revelation, which is reveiling so
Mm-hmm.
that you can be consumed by the gods
Yep.
and the birds of heaven and harvested. Your flesh will be harvested, your souls will be harvested, and then you will be reset
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and it's actually when you go into the Aramaic version in Genesis, and I don't have the exact one, but what it said was that the land was laid waste, like it was totaled.
Yeah.
So it was completely destroyed until nothing was there, and they recreated the new
Hmm.
reset.
Yeah.
Kind of there, right there.
It's all there, hidden in plain
Hmm.
sight. They tell you exactly. So, all right. Well, Lotta, thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you, Ken. It's been wonderful. Time just goes by so fast.
Hmm.
Please just tell everybody again where to find you. And of course, I will have it on the YouTube as well, but it's always good to end it with that. It's been an absolute pleasure. It is really profound to bring this all together and to bring the real history, right?
Hmm. Yeah. To unveil it.
To
That's what it
unveil it,
is.
yeah.
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 Thank you. And I will do that. So the best entry point if you wish to subscribe, and then when you subscribe, you have access to gem.university, and it's all set very structurally, and we have administrators and teams to walk you through the steps. But the best way is to go to freedomabsolute.substack.com and then subscribe there. The paid subscription is what gets you the private material that we have on the Substack, but primarily it's to get access to gem.university,
Mhm.
where there's quite a lot of everything we've talked about. So, and then Freedom Absolute on YouTube. Um, we also have Gemstone University on YouTube, which has a lot of the things I've done, interviews and videos and stuff for the last 10 to 12 years. How it all fits together is there, and some of the real important foundational stuff with symbology and all the rest of it going back in my work for 15 years. So Gemstone University on YouTube. And then our websites are panterravida.org, then gem.university, and ptvcourt.org, where you can read about the beginning of structuring our law form in our court and so forth. There's been a lot of, just say, distractions for the last 10 years. So a lot of the work is not yet put into all these sites. Over the next year, it will be much, much more fleshed out. PTV Court has a document that is the original document creating the Panterra Court and the law form. It's an integration of true
Mhm.
law, universal principles, equity, and various other components of what we have now put together as our unique law form. It's a template that my original intent and the model that we've created over these years was for members to come in to do the education, go through the master law course, learn how to create your own society, and then birth your own decentralized application for your family estate or your organization or your project or whatever, and use what we have integrated and largely perfected as the law form and using the court and otherwise to build your society on a decentralized
Mhm.
basis or structure. So that's what you'll find on PTV Court, and there's a lot more to come. And so the more people come in and choose to become active members, go through the education. We need lots of people to be
Mhm.
learning and help us build, because we have had a lot of distractions for the last 10 years, but now we're really ready um, to build and expand it.
Mhm.
So that's where you find us.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank you, Ken. It's always a pleasure. And I want to thank everybody. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye.